If you're in a group of woodworkers and you want to rile the whole group up, just make one of these two statements. If you use a CNC, you're not a woodworker. If you don't use a CNC, you're old-fashioned. Get with the times. For some reason, this question of if you use a CNC, are you a woodworker, really strikes a chord with people that make things. So in this video, I'm going to give you my take on this whole question, and we're going to go over some recent poll results that I did here on my channel. So let's start out with the poll that I recently did here on my channel, and here are the results. So out of 655 responses, which is actually a pretty good sample size, 91% said yes, they do consider using a CNC as woodworking. And 9% said no. So I thought this was really interesting. It was a little more skewed than I thought it would be. I thought it'd be a little more even, but nevertheless, the data doesn't lie. All right, so I picked a few comments here that summarize the 26 comments as a whole. Now, there was every side of the spectrum, no, yes, in the middle, and there's justification of why. You can go to the post on my YouTube channel and scroll through them all and read them all yourself, but here are a few that I found particularly interesting. Jacob says, so I guess I'm being semantic, but I see using a CNC as milling and processing. If you then use the cut pieces to assemble something, now you are woodworking. Cutting out signs and trays isn't woodworking. It's a type of manufacturing that can use wood as a media to process. It's very interesting and essential in our modern world, but I think it's off-putting to woodworkers because the only thing that is related is joinery. But a lot of CNC videos are about making single-piece projects that unless you use a CNC personally, it's not something that can be used to learn a new skill. It's merely entertainment. After watching a couple videos, it's not entertaining anymore because the content is so very similar. So I'm not going to react to any of these comments right away. I want you to read them without my bias. I'm going to give my thoughts here in a second, but here's the next one. 909 Fishing says, I have 2 years in engineering and 10 plus years as a machinist. I've used all kinds of CNC machines. I've also owned a few, and quite honestly, if you work with wood using hands or machines and are comfortable just calling yourself a woodworker, then you're a woodworker. Aaron says, yes, I got one. I've been a professional trim carpenter for over 25 years. Why? Never stop learning. Cosman said, CNC is not woodworking, it's manufacturing. This is not an insult. It is what it is. Andrew, not me, my technical name is Andrew, but Andrew says, a CNC is just a tool in the tool belt. You are still creating awesome products out of wood. Okay, so as you see, there's a lot of different sides there. There were a lot of people in the comments that said the CNC is just another tool in the shop. So they are putting it equal to table saw, bandsaw, planer, sander, all the tools. And then some people say that it's more manufacturing, that a CNC is not woodworking, it's machining something and it's manufacturing. So the problem here is defining where CNC fits into woodworking, right? So let's try to get a definition of woodworking and see if that helps us at all. All right, so the Oxford Dictionary, when you look up woodworking, this is what it says. It says the activity or skill making things out of wood. The activity or skill. Well, that doesn't help us or not because that's what we're debating, whether if CNC woodworking is a skill or if it's just an activity of manufacturing. So CNCers can argue any activity, whatever you're doing out of wood is woodworking, right? If you're making something out of wood, and that's woodworking. And we saw that in the comments. And then on the other hand, the word skill. So traditional woodworkers will argue that CNC doesn't take any skill or it's a different skill set. It's not woodworking. Woodworking takes a different skill. Yeah, that definition didn't help us at all. Other than making things and skills out of wood is considered woodworking. If someone was to ask me this question, this is how I would respond. Yes, I believe using a CNC is woodworking. And here's why. All CNC woodworking has steps before the CNC process and after the CNC process. So before the CNC process includes milling your lumber, whether that's you're using the planer or you're using the table saw. So after the CNC process, you have to sand and apply finish. Every piece that I make on my CNC in my shop touches another tool, whether that's the miter saw, whether that's the joiner, whatever it may be. Gluing up panels to CNC, like all of those things are involved in CNC woodworking. Just like traditional woodworking tools, as you're pushing and cutting your piece of wood and making it into the shape and dimensions that you want, the same thing is happening on the CNC. You're listening and you're watching and you're looking at the quality of cut and you're making adjustments. It's very much an involved process. It's not a set it and forget it. The other thing that you need to know is the material that you're working with. Knowing all different kinds of woods and when to use plywoods and when to use hardwoods and softwoods, and moisture content, hardness, and that has to do with how fast you can run things and how clean things cut. So knowledge of wood is extremely important in CNC woodworking. Something I believe is important though is CNC woodworkers should not be calling their products handmade. I think that is misleading. Even though you're shaping and you're using your hands with the processes I just described, it's not handmade. I would also go to the point is if you're using just power tools, I don't think it's fair to say handmade. When something is handmade in my mind, that's a potter that is truly using their hands. That's a basket weaver who is using their hands. I think there's not a lot of things that are truly handmade in the woodworking area except wood carving. I know you're using tools, but you are literally using your hands to scoop out wood. So CNC woodworkers, let's avoid calling our projects handmade. Overall, I think it's really cool that there are different kinds of woodworking. Are they all the same? No. Is Japanese kumiki the same as traditional US woodworking? No. If you want to use hand tools to shape your wood, then use hand tools. If you want to use power tools to shape your wood, then use power tools. If you want to use a CNC, then use a CNC. The CNC is the newest power tool on the block to DIYers, and they've just become more accessible over the past decade. And that's why this question has really come up. But I think it's really, really cool that we can have this technology in our shop. And if we embrace it, it can add to all the other things that we did before. I believe if you work with wood in any of these capacities, then you can call yourself a woodworker. I loved reading all the comments from the poll. And to be honest, none of you are wrong. Now, this question is pretty insignificant in the scheme of things. But as I was reading through the comments and looking at the poll results, it got me thinking a little bit bigger. It's really cool when you can pose a question where there's obviously two different sides and people can write their comments, 26 comments and some replies in there. And it was very cordial. Everybody kept it very cordial, even though there was disagreement. So I challenge you, just like the 26 people that responded to this poll, they're obviously different sides, right? There's for and against. And that's so true in our world right now. And everything wants to divide us no matter what. But it doesn't have to be that way. If we see where people are coming from, we can still disagree with them and still call them a friend. Those two things can exist together. So strive for that, be good to one another, and I'll see you in the next video.